Welcome to another episode of The Virtual Reality Reconstructionist, the premier podcast for exploring cutting edge technology in forensic investigations and virtual reality. I'm your host, Dr. Roger Ryan Ryder, owner of Triple R Investigations. Today, we're shifting into a space that bridges education, training, and public safety. With immersive reality technology scaling rapidly in schools and other institutions, there's also great promise as well as serious questions for first responders, safety training, and high stakes scenarios. Our guest today is Dr. Shannon Putman. She's a virtual reality specialist, educator, and consultant, leading some of the largest VR rollouts in the U.S., particularly in K-12 education, athletics, and corporate training. She has designed and managed large-scale deployments with deep expertise in special education and immersive learning. Let's get into the interview. Well, welcome, Dr. Putman. Could you tell us a little bit about your path and how did maybe transition from your special education to your classroom teaching in immersive VR?
Yeah. Hi, and thanks for having me. Super excited.
Yeah.
Actually, my path to education in general was kind of a crazy one. I always wanted to be a dolphin trainer at SeaWorld, or Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And I made it to SeaWorld. And so I was like, well, what do I do now? And my now husband was originally from Louisville, Kentucky. And so we ended up, instead of going back to Syracuse, we ended up moving to Louisville. And I was like, well, I guess I'll just be a elementary school teacher, and I had applied for a job to be a substitute, and they saw that I was fluent in American Sign Language, so they asked if I wanted to take a job interview for a job as an assistant in a new special ed classroom. And it was designed for, initially it was supposed to be for students who were nonverbal but were not deaf, because there's a big difference in deaf ed and non-deaf ed. And then of course we got deaf students, but I said, yeah, sure. It was health insurance. This was, pre-Obamacare and everything. And I got the job, and I was there, and it was about the 3rd day of school, and I realized that this is where I'm supposed to be. And the teacher left after 1 year, and I ended up taking over the class and returning to the University of Louisville to get my master's while I was teaching, and loved every minute of it. And started working with VR in 2016. I ended up seeing, I was just scrolling Twitter one day, and it was still Twitter back then. And I saw this headset thing. It was called the Oculus, and it was the DK2 kit, and purchased it myself and started using it in the classroom and have been dedicated to it ever since.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how this stuff drops in front of you and develops, right in front of your face. And I spent 10 years in the corporate world and started as a reserve officer, and it kind of attracted me to the business to the point where I transitioned 5 years later into law enforcement. And I've always been a tech guy, so that's kind of what got me here. And probably you too. Most people are comfortable with tech if they're going to get into stuff like this. So I'm assuming you probably, other than seeing what it has the potential, you're comfortable with digging into it and trying to understand it. So,
Yeah, and it
well,
was kinda
good.
needed for the job because it opened up a lot of worlds for my special ed students that they couldn't access
Mm.
otherwise, was technology. So, it kinda came with the job, and, I would have a lot of great ideas, and I would make my husband figure out how to make them happen, and because he's really good on the tech side, so we made a pretty
Oh,
good
okay.
team.
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. Yeah, that's a great story, and glad you stuck with it because I can see just with the knowledge of these platforms, how those that don't learn in a normal atmosphere, it could bridge some gaps for them
Yeah, for
and
sure.
get them into an area where they're comfortable and they should be comfortable. And it's not always the traditional way, right?
Exactly.
We've known that with all this time with education, it goes up and down, and depending on when politics get involved with it, it changes constantly. So, what was one of your first impactful VR or 360 video projects, and what did it teach you about how it works and what doesn't in immersive environments?
Yeah, so actually, the first time I really kind of used the tech for myself was with that DK2 kit. And I would ask my students and their families, like, what was a goal they had for the school year. Because I had the same students for 5 or 6 years, and it didn't have to be educational. And so then I had a mom one time, she told me through tears, she said, Shannon, we just want to go out to dinner as a family. And we never have, because the son had autism and their daughter did not, and it was too much for him, so they had never gone out to dinner, something that I think most families definitely take for granted and don't think twice about. And so I said, "Well, I've got this new headset thing, and let me see what I can do." And I got a 360 camera, and I went out to their favorite restaurant, which we didn't have these in Syracuse, but they had them here. It's called O'Charlie's, and they used to have free pie Wednesdays. And let me tell you, man, people love their free pie, and I'm not hating on it because free pie is delectable. And
Yeah.
I went out and filmed, and the manager was amazing. The servers, other customers, like people, would drop things on purpose so that we could have loud noises and things. And I brought it back to the headset. And now, granted, this was pretty early on, so I don't think it would take this much time now with how the technology has progressed. But every day he came in, he had to make it 60 seconds longer through the meal in the headset. And after 6 months, he made it an hour and 13 minutes at O'Charlie's. And so
Wow.
from that was the experience that I said, this is a game changer. And we hear those terms thrown around a lot, especially in ed tech. But when used efficiently, it truly does change people's lives. And it's not a toy. It is toy, it is fun, it is games, but it is so much more than that. And so I've just been dedicated to it ever since.
That's an awesome story 'cause, it just bridges that gap of what, that technology can do and bridging those. I guess the past year I've been looking into 360 photography, and I can see, the advancements out there 'cause I was, you know, the, um, the different, like Matterport storing theirs and controlling the product. You can't do that in law enforcement. They can't relieve it. So they can't lose that data. They have to control it for evidentiary purposes. So I see that evolving now. And of course, it's third party or other people doing it. But I can't imagine what you're doing. Was that like 10 years ago, or how long ago was that?
Yeah, that was 2016.
Okay. Yeah.
2016, 2017. Yeah, so it was like the
Yeah.
first kind of round of everything, and I'd never heard of these things. And it was wired to the computer, and there was no audio. The audio came out of the computer. And but they still had a couple of experiences, like, of course, they had, like, a roller coaster, but they had one where you went through the brain and you had to look and, basically shoot the bad neurons, and it was teaching kids about depression. And I thought it was really impactful, like, even back then, like, it was a very, meaningful experience. And even back then, I thought people were starting to use it in ways that were exciting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a key into where you are today, right? So that's amazing. And realistically, 9 years is a pretty good turnaround from what you've accomplished so far. We'll get into that more. So, but my next one kind of go a little bit larger scale. So tell us a little bit about your Kentucky Department of Education project. I understand it involved about 50 Oculus devices and MetaQuest 2S's. And what were the most significant logistic, technical, and human challenges that you ran through in that project?
Yeah, so that was pretty exciting. We deployed 2,450 headsets across 35 counties, and it was the Quest 2. I don't think I would have picked, so each location got 70 headsets. I think that's a lot to kind of, I feel like, almost kind of dump on a school, and it's a lot to manage, even just, space wise. So I'm not saying people need to run out and each school have 70 or anything like that. But what was fantastic to see was not only the technology, but the managing of the technology. So when I was working and I had managed 50 Oculus Go's at my elementary school when I was still working there, and we didn't have a management software. So I used to have to load my dogs and my husband up every Sunday and go down and put each headset on and get them ready for the week. And then I learned how to have student helpers and things like that. But now they have management software, and the one that I always recommend, which I think is the best, there's, good ones, but Manage XR by far and away has the most comprehensive list of features. They're a fantastic group of people, and they're in it for the right reasons. And so you can manage everything from your computer, can, have one headset have, certain content on it, and another headset have a certain other content. And that's really important because what so many people in the industry do, and that's what I like to say with, like, about VR, the VR industry, is they think that either A, educators, everybody's tried VR, and less than 25% of the population has, and they also think that it's easy to use, and it's absolutely not. It is not there yet. They love to think that it is, and maybe that's taboo for me to say that, but until we acknowledge that and actually teach educators what the technology is, how to use it, and why it's valuable, it's never going to take off. So, when the project ended, and then there was no longer any support, you can see the amount of headset usage just dropped instantly because people didn't have the support, they didn't learn. If you only go for that one tech superstar in the building, well, what happens when they leave?
Mm,
Nobody picks it up. And so it has to become a part of everyday curriculum and not something special like, oh, that's the day we go down to the VR lab. Like, no, it has to be integrated just like we have Chromebooks, just like we have calculators. And until that happens, it's always going to be this battle that feels unwinnable.
wow. Yeah, some interesting logistics there as far as, and I see that kind of in the laser scanner law enforcement business was getting lawyers and judges educated to where they understood it when they had to deal with it because it was out there for 3 or 4 years and it wouldn't get accepted in cases just because they didn't know anything about it, right? So the final step was, a good operator that convinced the judge, hey, let me show you how it works and talk about the details. And it finally got into court. So, there's some of the same issues there. And with law enforcement personnel change, like you're saying, right? You get that
Yeah.
one person is supporting, right? And then all of a sudden they're gone. Now, what do you do if it doesn't get picked up by the next one? So,
Yeah, exactly. And people don't know what they don't know, and they have their assumptions and they think, oh, that's this or that's that. And they don't actually know what it is. So it takes that time to educate them about what it is and what it can do and have it backed by research. That's another thing. We always have to continue to do specific research. Everybody quotes, oh, well, VR improves attention and blah, and it's these generic figures. And I'm like, until we actually drill down and get some very specific examples, we're not proving our case. And so that's another thing that I continue to do is really focus on that research.
yeah, that's a great point. So, what do you think? In the past 10 years, companies like Manage XR, how do you think they've improved that concept and acceptability of the, these large rollouts?
Well, so I think that what they've done is first off, they've given, the power to the educator. So unlike other forms of technology in the classroom, you actually have more control over the headset than you do with a Chromebook. So like, yes, they have things like Go Guardian, but teachers tell me every day, they're like, well, if my kids want to get on, on their Chromebook and get on something, that they're not, like a game or something like that, like I can't stop them. And I'm like, I know, but on the headset you can. You can limit, they're only allowed to do what you're allowing them to do. And there's this fear, this just innate fear with educators where it's like, I can't see what they're doing. Well, I need to see what they're doing. I need to see what they're doing. Well, why? And I'll ask them, they're like, well, I need to make sure they're doing the right thing. And I'm like, they're only allowed to do what you're allowing them to do. And then they're like, oh, well, and I'm like, yeah, so it doesn't, because I know for a fact whether, and I use Chromebook, like as a generic term, just because so much of education has gone in heavy on the $200 Chromebook. But with any, one-to-one device in schools, 100% guarantee you that educator is not walking around the entire time monitoring what they're doing the whole time. So I'm like, you don't do it with that. So why is it now all of a sudden you feel you need to do it with the headset? And I don't know if it's a power thing or if it's a control thing, but they're so scared of that. And so with Manage XR, I can reassure them that I always joke, I say, unless they have some NSA level hacking, which if they do, I always say, good on you. And I like to
Right.
reward effort. So that's a new career field for the student. But otherwise, you've got control and you can see in real time what they're doing. You can do all these things. And if they do something they're not supposed to, you can see it. And then to that point, though, what I also like to tell educators is I was like, we got to give kids a chance at some point because when I had those Oculus Go's, I could not do any of that. But guess what? I told those kids I could. I said, look, if you do anything wrong, I'm going to know. I can see it. It's all right here and you won't ever get to use it again. Well, guess what? They didn't mess up because it was new and exciting and something that they would never have the chance to do anywhere else. So they didn't want to lose it. So they behaved because I gave them the opportunity to. So the more that we encourage kids to make the right decisions for the right reasons and because they want to, then the less you have to feel like you have to monitor and control and watch. And so that's what I tried to do. And I try to get people to kind of change their whole, instructional approach.
That's interesting. So how do you choose the content to put into the headsets these days? I know Managed XR helps you manage them, but is it proprietary that you're having to design, or is there some companies out there creating some good content for y'all to use in education?
So it's a good mix. There's certainly a lot more now than there was back then. One of the softwares that I have been loyal and dedicated to and have loved from since 2018 is a software called Engage. And I call it the Swiss Army knife of VR because you can do any and everything. And to see the progression of where they started and where they are now, shout out to my guy, Chris Madsen. He's been there since the day I met them and is unbelievable. They have the ability where they have pre-created lessons, and content for you, but then they also have the ability for you to create your own. And now, and I hate buzzwords, but you can't get around it. Sorry, grandma, I dislike buzzwords. Everything now is AI, AI, AI. Well, they've integrated it in a thoughtful and creative way. So they have the School of AI where they have historical figures that you can go interview and talk to. And then they have their AI creator. So if you have a student who's going to interview for a job at Subway, you can have them interview and engage. And so it allows you to do everything. But it's also a huge learning curve. They've made it very easy, but it's still a different set of skills. So then there's also, great content, whether it's XREPs, Career View, which is 360 video field trips and job shadowing, career exploration. Then they have things that kind of work right out of the box, as I like to say. But what I like to do differently and what sets me apart and why my training is different is because I don't teach the technology to a specific app. Educators are a group of people that love to be, is there an app for that? Is there an app for that? I'm like, there doesn't have to be an app for that. And so if you look at the technology as a learning tool, then the educator gets to maintain their creativity. And so the example I always give is when I had a teacher ask me about money skills. She's like, "Hey, Shannon, we're doing money skills. You got anything?" Especially back then, there was no VR app. Let's teach money. And guess what? There was a fishing game called Bait. And every time you caught a fish, you earned stars and money. And it was one of the best 60-minute lessons I have ever done because the kids were, first off, engaged. We had no behavior problems. Second, they were so excited about what they were doing. The communication exchanges that they were having with each other and with me I could have never gotten to them prompted. And we got to higher order thinking that I couldn't have gotten to with a worksheet. So if they caught a fish and it was 10 pounds and they earned 50 coins, I would ask them, okay, how heavy do you think a fish would need to be to get you 100 coins? And now these are higher order questions that we all strive for in our lessons, but we struggle to get to. So once you understand that technology and you know what's available, you can still have your creativity. It's not replacing you. That's the big thing too. Teachers and people fear technology is replacing everybody. It doesn't replace you. You can use that to enhance what you're doing. And I have students who literally still reach out to me about VR. I actually just today, I was at Seneca High School for a career fair and I was teaching the kids. It was all about the industry. And I actually had a student who was at Cochrane and he came up and he said, "Miss Shannon, you're still doing the VR?" I said, "Yes, buddy, I am." And he's like, "I'll never forget," because they did a social studies lesson called My Brother's Keeper. And we literally talked about it. And that was like 6 years ago. And that kid still remembered it, remembered my name, and came right up to me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a engagement like that you never know where you're gonna, take somebody, right? Especially
Yeah.
at that age, even at high school. That's cool. So you mentioned a little bit about teaching. So I know a little bit in VR, they kind of emphasize you have to you got to change not only what you teach, but how you teach it. Are you seeing that happen in practice itself in any way?
Not as much as it needs to. So that's what I
Okay.
focus on as well. But there's kind of this theory, I guess you could say, in the industry, and I call them tech bros. Like tech bros think they know what's best because they know tech, and they're like, "I went to school, I know education." No, You don't, and you've never taught it, you've never been in a classroom, you haven't had desks thrown at you, you haven't been stabbed. So, they don't get why I complain about things and why when I tell them it's not taking off, because it is different. So you do have to build in extra time for things. If and as much as I love this technology, it's not quite ready yet. And I say that to mean if I go into a school and there's a tablet or there's a computer, 99% of the time it's going to work. I mean it does. They're there, they're reliable. Even a $200 one, they work. I cannot say that about a headset. The Pico 4 Ultra, I have had the least amount of problems with, but like Meta, I'll be at a school and I've been at that school before and randomly, for absolutely no reason whatsoever, three of the controllers just unpaired magically from a headset. Well, now what happens is the only way you can repair those controllers is you have to actually get the app and use the app to repair the controllers. Well, that school had an SOS, so my phone was SOS. So I literally had to send my assistant out to the parking lot with my phone and the headsets just to be able to get them to reset. And no teacher can do that. That's completely unrealistic. And until it gets to a level where it is reliable like that, those things are going to happen. And that happens once. And let me tell you, man, educators are a tough group. If they look stupid and it doesn't go well in front of their kids, they're done. Like they're not giving you a second chance. There's no three strikes with them. So we don't have the ability and we don't have the luxury of it not working every single time.
Yeah, it's interesting with that technology. It was one of the school shootings where the principal tried to initiate the lockdown through their phone, and the Wi-Fi signal wouldn't take the app's signal to the system. So, they'd been doing it for so long, I guess maybe they didn't use the PA anymore, but anyway, it delayed that process even though they had the technology to do it. They just didn't address, like you're saying, got certain situations and,
Yeah.
even though the kids may or may not be using Wi-Fi, if you're going to use it reliably, you're going to have to make sure it works and your systems can talk to each other. So,
Especially
yeah,
something like
well,
that
good
when
point.
it's life or death potentially. I
Yeah,
mean, not a headset not working usually isn't, to that level, but if we've lost somebody, now not only have I lost that teacher because 'cause they're not gonna try it again, but they're also going to vocally complain about it, and they're going to let other people know, "It didn't work for me," and so now it's like, well, now I've gotta fight them and everybody that they've talked to, and so we need it to be reliable, and it can be, and we're close. I just think that, people and it happens in every industry, people that are so far removed from the actual user are making the decisions, and it's hard to persuade that change, but we're getting there for sure.
yeah, that's great. Well, and stuff like Manage XR is going to help you, right? Because if I understand it right, that you can do your updates on your headsets through that system. So if a software fixes that glitch that you found, all the headsets are going to get updated as opposed to you going to each one, all
Exactly.
70 of them,
Yeah,
and updating it, yeah, on a Sunday night to have
right.
your family time together.
And I always had to work it around the Bills games because I'm not missing a Bills game for anybody. Go
Not
Bills.
even for VR, huh?
Nope.
Yeah, so if a school district obviously, they're limited resources, a whole lot like, we deal with law enforcement, it's a limited budget, and what kind of priorities should they set to ensure that the equipment's accessible and it's meaningly used, like you're talking about, other than not technology, but financial, how do they address that?
Well, I think one of the problems because no matter what, I mean, currently right now, obviously funding is definitely a sore spot of conversation. We don't need to talk about that, but we all know it, let's face it. So that always happens, that's cyclical, but there's this false narrative that people think they need to have a whole class set and they need to have the whole class on at the same time. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. That actually can be very overwhelming. If you've never used VR before, I wouldn't suggest that you put all 30 kids on at the same time. I've had 50 kindergartners in a headset at the same time. And let me tell you, it takes a special person because it's not easy. So you can start with, I like to tell people, I would start with one. Like if I only had a certain amount of money, I would start with one headset and one really solid software like Engage or XReps and Manage XR and go from there and then expand out because you can do so many different things. You can, I think 4 is a fantastic number. 4 to 10 is the best, but if you could only get one, I would get one. And then you can do things where you do stations or, I did relay races with headsets. I mean, you can do all these different creative things and I'll hear people say, well, if I let that kid use the headset, everybody's going to want to use it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. Like,
Yeah.
exactly. So use it to your benefit. I'm sick of well, they need to be intrinsically motivated. Yeah, okay. Well, we all need some external help every now and then too. And so if I have a kid that will not work, will not get their work done, won't do what they want, and VR is the way that they're going to do it, then guess what? I'm going to use that because I'm going to do whatever it takes to make my students successful. And so then you shape the behavior. If then, it is the most simple and basic human principle. If I want something, then I have to do something. If I want a new car, then I need to have money. If I want money, I need to have a job. It's the same thing. And so if your if is big enough, then the kids are going to do it. And you can also integrate physical fitness and, brain activity, activating both sides of the brain, crossing midline, teaching social and emotional intelligence, learning how to breathe, how to regulate your emotions. You can do all of this with one headset. And so I like to look at that is that it's actually much more affordable than you think.
Yeah, well, it's a great point, and it's interesting that you can scale it up like it's almost like, a research project, right? You can start a little bit, start trickling out or rolling out a project like you probably experienced with your schools, right? You started with your classroom, rolled it out to bigger and bigger until you ended up with the Kentucky project, where you had, were able to stair step it to the point of it working out for everybody. So that's a great point. I want to
Yeah.
transition a little bit from education to other industries on you. I know much of your work is in education, but I think you have some experience in athletic training and simulators, right? Okay. Do
Yeah.
you see parallels in those areas, those immersive realities be applied to other ones, obviously with me, with public safety, and how do you see that training developing?
Yeah. So, yes, like my specialty would be education. But the thing that I tell people is that the subject matter is of no consequence. Quality instruction is quality instruction. So, if you need to learn something, this technology can help you. And there's been multiple research studies that have shown that when certain thresholds are met, because they actually did it with brain scans, the brain cannot tell the difference between the virtual world and the physical world. So, that gives us great power. And I always say, of course, with great power comes great responsibility. But it's the same thing. So if I need to learn fractions or if I need to learn what a cover 2 looks like when I'm playing the New England Patriots, it's the same thing. I have to use the same parts of the brain. And so that's exactly what XReps does. And that's why I designed XReps how I did is it's designed, I say, to train a smarter quarterback on and off the field. And so in athletic training, we're seeing a lot of things so we saw like with Striver and Stanford, where they started with the static 360 video. And then Jaden Daniels used Cognilyze to watch the plays at like 2 times the speed because that was one of the things is it's so much faster. It's so much faster. So he was prepared for that. And we see in athletic training a lot of reaction boards and all these kind of things. And they're like, oh, it's working on their hand-eye coordination. But we haven't actually really seen a solid group of research that shows that actually then relates to performance on the field. Whereas if you're training the brain to make the right decision faster, no matter what the situation, we know that that translates to better performance. If I'm looking at, so if I, put in a headset and I can see the play at 3 times, the speed, awesome. But well, what happens when they sneak a blitzer in or your coverage breaks down and now the quarterback has to scramble. Now it's a whole new set of skills. Whereas when you're training the brain like we do, it trains you for all of those, no matter what it throws at you. And so that works across anything in life. If I need to make a split second decision, I need to be able to scan the scene and analyze, is that a person bringing a phone to their head or are they bringing up a gun? And the same skills that I use are what need to be trained. And one of the things that most people tend to miss and nobody else targets is spatial awareness. And we're able to use VR to train spatial awareness. And it's so critically important. It's how we understand the world. And it's goes it to the core of why VR is so effective. And that's because you consume a 3D content in a 3D format. So when you have a 3D model and it's on a computer screen and you can move it around and manipulate it, that's awesome. But it's still 2D. You're still consuming it in 2D. So when you bring it into that headset, now I'm actually seeing it how my brain would see it in the physical world. And that's where the real magic happens. So that's why it can work no matter what you're doing. And people always ask me, well, what can I do with VR? And I always say that's the wrong question because you can do anything. The better question is, what are you doing? And I'll tell you where VR can fit into it.
Gotcha. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, the spatial features is always exciting and eye tracking. I see all that developing into some really interesting areas. I see some things in law enforcement I'd like to get your opinion on, some design challenges, specifically in public safety. Do you think um, items like realism, safety, liability, um, fidelity of the scenario itself as opposed to characters versus realistic stress indications. What do you think are some important design features that should be looked at first?
I think it definitely depends on the situation. So I remember somebody in the industry told me, they said, well, the kids don't care about the graphics because it's just so cool to have the headset. It can be lower quality. And I'm like, actually, no, they do, because you got to think this is a generation, even, our young adults and new recruits into the academy. They grew up on console gaming, and console gaming has been unbelievable. You look at like Call of Duty, these games, it's sometimes hard to tell if it's a computer generated image or if it's a real image. You look at Unreal Engines and their MetaHuman creator. Most people can't tell that that's not a real person. So that's what they're used to. So then if you now throw something at them that isn't, they're like, and so it breaks kind of that presence. So that's what we're always striving for in VR, where that's where the brain thinks it's the physical world, is when we have that presence. And so that's where you got to look at what the situation is. So if it's something where, I'm teaching, a student how to, how to learn fractions and things like that, it can be more fun. It can be more cartoony type things. But if it's something that is going to be like life or death, or, surveying a scene, crowd control, those kind of things, it needs to be as realistic as we can make it, because otherwise people are smart. They know the brain has learned that. And there's also, sometimes you'll see a lot of mixing of content. So you'll have a 360 video and then a computer generated image imposed on it as well.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about like hotspots or things like that, like information stations, none of that. And somebody said it was like seeing Homer Simpson walk down the street. Your brain, it doesn't look right. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So I think we also need to be careful about how much material we use. And a new thing, everybody now, one of the big buzz things is Gaussian splats. And, where you actually scan the physical object and it stitches it together and gives you a 3D model. And it's awesome, but I wanna see it get to the next level where then it could become interactive. Or I don't wanna put a computer generated, like, I don't wanna do a Gaussian splat of a castle and then put a 3D, computer generated knight in there, and, now it looks, so, like, don't ruin what's awesome by trying to get too much. I think we can force too much, and it's like, just let things be natural. And again, consider the outcome and what the goal is. If the goal is entertainment and fun and physical fitness, things like that, it can be a little bit different animation styles and things like that. And there's also beautiful animation styles of games that make for a better experience. If I'm playing a game, maybe I don't want it to be realistic. So again, it depends on what you're doing. But if it's involving police and law enforcement and things like that, I would wanna see it as real as we can get it. But then that also depends on the headset too. So you're
Yeah.
limited by what it can process.
Yeah, true. I think they made some great advancements in that. It kind of helped out that ability. But I think at realism, you're right on. On my research, I used the Magic Leap, and the students could tell that it was a character, right? But what their response was, it was realistic enough, and the movements were realistic enough that it felt like they were in the room. So they were easily talking to them,
Mhm.
asking them to do things, and interacting. It could probably be advanced as well, but and we're dealing with adults as well. So I think the realism also kind of helps them understand what could happen in the field, in the public safety environment, what they could be up against, because a lot of this is, um, my experience was at the academy, so they haven't had that experience, right? So they just want to absorb it. Well, officers in the field can do it too, because, depending on where you work, you may not have that experience, but one time in your career,
Mhm.
So if you practice that in VR 2 or 3 times and it was a good result, it could have been because of that VR experience, right? Because you at least had some practice sessions with it. So, yeah, I think that's where it's leading toward. I think that's they understand that that's probably the best impact on law enforcement is to help with those scenarios, de-escalation, the things that can go bad. It's not just because officers made it go bad. They just didn't have the skills and knowledge to understand to change gears and how to reduce that, right? I
Mhm.
mean, for years we've been training negotiators, but you can't train all 80 of your officers to be negotiators, right?
Right.
That's a lot of time and they got to work sometimes. So I know one thing I used was kind of an after action review showing them what they did and how they accomplished their session and then give them some feedback. It was a real positive response. Do you do anything like that in the educational field as far as VR? And what do you think about that concept of, reviewing an incident with law enforcement and for that teaching moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it happened by happen chance one time. I was filming in a kindergarten classroom with a 360 camera for some of the student teachers that I was going to be working with, and they had only had high school experience. And so I was going to give them an experience of being in a kindergarten classroom because it's very different. And one of the kids punched another kid, and so they asked me because I worked with behavior, and so I brought the kid out and I was talking to him and stuff. I was like, "Well, you know what? I was filming. Let's see if I got that." And so we did. And so I put that student so I'd gotten him calm, and then I put him in the headset and we reviewed the video. And I said, "All right, well, go ahead, look around, what do you see?" And we did. And then it got to the point where what happened was the other kid had bumped into his shoes and they were his new shoes and he didn't want him to get scuffed. And so I said to him, I said, "Well, what happened?" He hit my shoes. I said, "Well, let's go back. Let's look at him." I was like, "Was he even looking at you?" And he's like, "Oh, no, it wasn't. It was an accident." I said, "Okay, well," I said, "what could we have done? Look around you. Look to your right." And like, but when the kid had hit, when he had hit the shoes in the video, because he thought he was really back there, it got him back into that mindset. He got mad. He balled his fists up again. And so when his brain was firing like that, I was able to talk to him about a different decision in the moment because everybody makes the right decision when they're calm. And that's the thing with behavior. We try to do these things, but typically makes the right decision when they're calm. But when we're mad, that's when we know our decision making isn't always the best. And so I said to him, I said, "Okay, well, look around. Look to your right. Look at your other side. Could you have moved over?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." And so we talked through it. And then when we went back into the classroom, I was not going to make him apologize because I think it's meaningless to apologize if you don't mean it. I will have them say things like, "I won't, I'm sorry I hurt you," or like, "I'll work to not do that again." But I'm not just gonna be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hit you," because he wasn't sorry he hit him. And so I think it's meaningless. But we went back in and unprompted, I hadn't even talked to him yet. He went up and he's like, "I'm sorry I pushed you. Sorry I hit you." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah,
It's that ability to be able to put him back in that moment. And so then, you can review and get back into it. So it's like, "Okay, you made this decision. Why did you make that decision? Let's look, let's see what were the other options that you had." And so now, especially because we know the brain is not reliable. We just know it. We know
yeah,
that by witness testimony. We know the research into it that, witness testimony is not as accurate as we like to think that it is. The brain fills in gaps and does things that sometimes is inexplainable. So when we can get them back into that mode, that's where we can really start to make a difference.
yeah. Great point, and a good example like that you experienced. And I saw the same thing when I was doing the after action stuff. So I think it's for us, it's for law enforcement, public safety, it's a real tool because I think one of the big things about that is not just going through that experience, but walking through it, what you did and didn't do, and being able to discuss that. Just it sinks your teeth into that learning session, and they tend to do a whole lot better the next time around. So for the adults, it's good, and obviously for the kids, it's good too because he learned a good lesson on
Yeah.
that one. So,
Doesn't mean he never punched another kid, but,
uh,
at least, like, we're starting to build that solid foundation, you know? And also, I think
yeah,
it really can help with the empathy. So, like, everybody and my father was a police officer, and so, there's good and bad in every profession and things like that, but I know a lot of people tend to be like, "Well, I would never do that." and whether it's a police officer, whether it's a firefighter, whatever. And it's like, well, how do you know you wouldn't do that? And so it's like, well, they made this split second decision, put you in it, and let's see what you would have done. Not that maybe it wouldn't maybe change whatever, but at least you can get a better understanding of what other people are going through.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because you always got to ask that in law enforcement, right? Because you never want to take a life, but you talk yourself through that, and can you really do it in the end? Is
Right.
always a question. So, well, let's change just a little bit. Go to tech and maybe some trends. We talked about it some, but emerging hardware and software. What would be the one that you would pick as the most exciting change in hardware and software to improve this environment?
Well, I know the big buzz right now, everybody's all hooping and hollering about AR glasses, and Meta and the Ray-Bans and this and that, and I love them too. Like, I'm super excited about the potential and what we can do with them. I just like to I don't say it's not don't believe the hype, but it's do it the right introduce it the right way so that it doesn't tank because the technology and what we're doing has so much potential, but like so did Google Glass. But they rushed it out and it came out too soon and it wasn't ready. And so then everybody was like, "Oh, that tanked." And then it was another 8 years before we even tried anything again. And so there's kind of some things that I would like to say. Like, first off, the display on the glasses is not as big as people think it is. So it is hard and it is very taxing on the eyes. So we always talk about, well, we got to limit screen time and it's bad for their eyes and devices and devices and devices. And that's all true. But now it's like you want to put a device on your eye 24/7. Like, it takes a lot of brain and eye power to do that. And we're not
Yeah.
ready for that yet. So if we introduce it in a thoughtful and walk before we run type of way, I'm really excited about that. But I'm also really excited because I feel like the industry has kind of just looked for the next big thing, because every year it's, oh, VR is dead and blah, blah, blah. But it was like, first it was, we've got the standalone headset. Now we've got hand tracking. Now, oh, we've got pass through. Now we've got XR glasses. And I'm like, I still haven't even gotten teachers to get into a headset yet. Like, we certainly haven't even started talking about hand tracking, pass through, whatever. So it's like, take those steps and then make it accessible for everybody. I know right now, DEI, apparently we're not allowed to talk about it, but I refuse to conform to that. And there's so many people that this technology could help, and we don't have the accessibility features that we need. And so I'm excited for more accessibility features. The Apple Vision Pro, for a lot of people, are like, oh, well, it didn't do well, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that's because it was a different market. But some of the accessibility features on the Vision Pro are incredibly exciting to me. Like, you can train it to use as a response. So some of my nonverbal students to be able to respond and control
Wow.
the device like that, like, those are things that get me really excited. And so I'd love to see features like that, a kind of across the board. And, I'm a huge, huge supporter, and I love the Pico 4 Ultra and I love the body trackers because they're so light. They're inexpensive. You can put them on objects, you can put them on body parts. So now if I have, somebody who's paralyzed from the chest down and they can't use their hands, but guess what? They can use their shoulder. Now I can get them involved. And so those are the things that I'm really looking forward to.
Wow, that's a great example. And I saw something lately about it was on screen, so it was interactive. It wasn't truly VR, but it was university educational students having to teach a class, but they were basically talking to a screen. They were the teacher, but the screen was interactive with students, AI students.
Was it
So
out of
they would teach
USF?
something, and they would every now and then you would see some of them do something to distract the teacher, and they'd have to address it and then go back to their lecture and talk to it. And but they're having discussion with these AIs in class, and it's like just like a classroom, right? I mean, somebody's going to ask a question, or you say, "What do you think?" and they answer. But I thought, man, what a great skill to get their confidence up, before they go out and start assistant teaching and helping, and they're stuck in that real environment, right? That they at least broke the ice and got some of that fear out of the way in that practice session, and then they would have a debrief, like, what do you think, and you know, do their own skill assessment. Did they do well or not? So,
Yeah,
so
that's fabulous. And And, as somebody who mentored student teachers and things, I can tell you right now, we're not doing the best job preparing these students for what they're going to see in the real world and some of the behaviors and things. And that's also another kind of good point too. You said it's not VR, and I'm like, but it doesn't always have to be. That's another thing that I think the industry hurts itself because some people are like, it has to be 3 DOF. No, it has to be 6 DOF. It has to be VR. No, it has to be mixed reality. And there's a time and a place for everything. All of it is great and all of it has its usage. So it doesn't have to be this hard line in the sand, yes or no. And when we're talking about VR, that is the headset, the HMD, that's the one piece of technology I will never force on somebody. If they don't want to use it, I'm not going to force them to. So you have to take that into account and have other modes so that they can still be involved in the lesson. And so all of it is great. Anything that helps people is great. So it doesn't have to be this all or nothing. And I think learning those situations too. And I also don't think we need to force it. You know, like it doesn't have to be for everything. You don't have to you have to say, is it worth putting the headset on? If it isn't, then no, don't use it. Don't force it. And so those decisions are also kind of important in keeping this industry going.
Yeah, it's a good point. In my research, I had one student, she said she used VR and got nauseous. And, I explained to them we're using augmented reality so you can see everything around you, just the characters are digital. And so she did. She can, right before her turn, she confronted me and I'm not sure about this. And I said, hey, it's all voluntary. If you want to try it, it ain't working, pull them off. You don't have to do this, but you may find it a different response. And sure enough, she did really well in the experience. And she looked up and she goes, man, I'm glad I did that because it made no difference. She said, I didn't get sick and get nauseous and I really enjoyed it. So
It's
anyway, it was a
awesome.
good experience to understand, the technology difference there.
Yeah.
So one thing on technology, so if we look ahead about 5 to 10 years, what would you hope to see in the virtuality environment used in public safety and emergency management or any of those high stakes kind of training, fire apparatus, whatever? What would you like to see?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And if I had my magic wand and could do it, I would like to see not like full on RoboCop level, because people fear the machines and Terminator and all that kind of thing. But I would like to see uh, wearables that can help first off, like, as we're seeing with fitness and things like that, tracking heart rate, those kind of things so that we can, monitor ourselves and be the healthiest that we can be as, as an officer or something like that. Things that can help assist. So I still want it to be human centered. So, if it's glasses and AR glasses, then it can alert them to certain things or maybe show you the path, a quicker path depending on current traffic patterns, but the human's still driving it. And I know everybody doesn't, agree with that. They're like humans make mistakes and blah blah. I'm like, yeah, but like so does, machine learning. Like there's still limitations to everything. But what I'd really like is for everybody to be able to have equal access, whether that's because of, disabilities or because of, economics, those kind of things. I had somebody tell me, well, everybody's tried a Quest. And I'm like, I worked with kids in 2025 in Eastern Kentucky that have not and never had running water and still have an outhouse. So, no, everybody has not tried a Quest. So, I'd like to see us, instead of just always trying to find the next great thing, to look at for more, how we can kind of get a little bit more equality and just, improve for good. Like, I think so many people are so worried about like AI and taking our jobs and being replaced and things like that. And so like today at the career fair, I told the kids, I said, look, AI is being used. You can't get away from it. So instead of trying to rally against it, learn how to use it. So when you put on your resume, your list of skills, not only should you include Microsoft Word, Excel, the old classics, but you should also include ChatGPT, Gemini. You can make marketing videos using Flow. Like, make yourself a better candidate by using and embracing them as opposed to fighting against them. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because I think that's what I went through in college was learning programming and computers and get comfortable with it because they're going to be there, right? They're going to be next. So yeah, it's some great advice on making sure. that they at least embrace it and dig into it to see what it's gonna do. Because it's like you said, it's gonna be part of
Yeah,
the daily thing. It
and
was, I was in my, I guess, 20s when I first saw a brick cell phone. It was about 10 pounds, and it was, but, it was important and it was a big thing. Now they, weigh a couple of ounces and we put them in our pockets. So,
right? They always said,
but
"Oh, you're
yeah,
not gonna carry a calculator around." Actually, yeah, we do.
yeah, we do.
And I always call it they call it the ATM effect. So they actually had done research because, when they first came out with ATMs, all the bank tellers, like, revolted because they were like, they're gonna take our jobs, blah, 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 blah." Well, they found out that actually people had easier access to their money, so they were banking more. So the amount of job openings for bank tellers actually went up after they introduced the
Wow.
ATM. And they're seeing that even, like, with McDonald's and things like that. They're like, "Oh, they're not gonna, they're gonna have a teller and they're not gonna need employees." Well, no, actually there was more people ordering, so they needed more people cooking. They needed more people filling these things. So, it isn't always this doomsday that people think it will be. But that's because we have to be careful about it too. Because it can get that way and it can be used for bad. And there's always gonna be those people. But I think the more that we keep each other in check and reassure and always, again, keep the human at the center of it, I think we're gonna be okay.
I think last we'll kind of close up with, maybe to the listeners. And the first one was, for school leaders, public safety trainers, and police academies, maybe even institutions that are training, who want to start some kind of immersive tech that we've been talking about. What would you advise them on their first and most important step to take would be?
Absolutely do your research or talk to somebody that knows what they're doing, like myself, because there is so much involved in this industry and there are so many decisions that have to be made that the average person has no clue even about. And whether that's a management software like Manage XR, whether that's which headset you're going to use, what else is entailed with that. It's not like so many teachers think, "Oh, well, I just order the headset and I go." No. Like, if you're getting Meta, you have to know what their software subscription is. You have to know how to get your account. If you're getting, something else, you have to know. And, Samsung just, launched their headset last week. And so they're like, "Oh, I'll get that." Well, guess what? It doesn't have controllers. What do you mean it doesn't have so there's so many decisions. And some companies have a fantastic marketing team and they make it look like it's just the best thing ever and they overpromise and underdeliver and then you're like, "Well, that was a waste." Well, yeah, because
Yeah.
you didn't talk to anybody and you got kinda suckered in and so find out what you want to do and how you're going to get there. So like I said, I of course will talk to anybody. I love it. This is what I love to do. But if it's not me, then somebody, do your research, find out exactly what it will take and what you'll need and all the costs associated with it. And also think about what your goal is. So what is your actual goal? And the kind of I'm big on analogies and stories and stuff, but the thing I always go back to is when I was teaching special ed and I had my students and we were doing a math activity and it was to cut out you had to cut out, some shapes and glue them on the right thing or whatever. Well, the point of the activity and the purpose of the lesson was that they learned the math. So I cut the shapes out and stuff for them at a time. And I remember my OT was like, "Well, they need to learn to cut." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. And they'll do that during cutting time. But the point of this lesson is the math. And my goal is that they learn how to add, not that they cut." So then she was kind of like, took a step back. I was like, "Oh, okay." Because trust me, if it was just cutting, it would have taken a lot longer than what it did. And so I had separate time for that. So know what your goal is and stay focused on your goal and don't get distracted by bells and whistles and all those other things and focus on the goal and find out what will it take for me to reach that goal. And whether that's research or talking to somebody, absolutely do that first. And somebody that's not like, I think directly paid by the company, that's
Mm.
independent. Personally think, there's great people. I'm not knocking anybody. I love everything about this industry and everybody in it. But sometimes you can be led astray sometimes. And so you don't want to waste that money because you're never going to get a second chance at it.
Yeah, that's a great point, a great tip because, yeah, I think like for me, I tend to have to put on the brakes, to for technology and think about it and ask questions because I'm an easy sell, and especially when I can see immediately, when where positive results are going to happen. On the backside of that, what's the most common pitfall you've seen in deploying VR in education?
By far and away is the it is everything that has to happen before you actually use the VR and use the software. So you can have the most amazing software on the planet, and if they can't get to it, it doesn't matter. And if the teacher's not going to let them use it, it's also not gonna matter. Don't I try to not force the teachers into the headset to make them have to use it, the educators. I want them to, but if they're not going to, then I want them to at least be willing to let the students use it. And I always say, they're like, "Well, I'm not comfortable with technology." And I say, "It's not about you. That's the whole point. It's not about you. It's about your students. And so take you out of it and give them what they need." And so in order for that to happen, they have to know everything. And so when you talk to somebody who's in the industry and has used headsets all the time and everything, they're like, "Oh, it's easy, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, no, it's not. First off, you have to make sure it's charged. You have to make sure it's connected to the internet. You have to make sure, and it's only possible because of things like Manage XR. But that means you now have to learn, how do you get the software into your Manage XR account? How do you get the websites in there? How do you deploy it? What's a configuration? All of these things, then you have to get it onto the headset. You have to make sure. Then is it working that day? Do kids have space? There's so many things that have to happen before the actual lesson that if you're not a part of that everyday classroom environment, you have no idea what it takes. And so all of that other stuff happens first. Then you can have all the awesome fancy software and things like that and stuff. But until it's able to be a part of the actual everyday curriculum, as opposed to just, that's our special VR day, and we're going down to the VR lab, and some other teacher is gonna facilitate the lesson because they know VR, and I don't have to do anything. Like, yeah, I still did that, and that's great because then the kids are still getting it, but it needs to be more of a natural flow, and just give it a shot. Like, just try. That's, like, honestly, like, what do you have to lose, you know? And they'll be like, "Well, if it doesn't work and I look stupid in front of my students," like, so you're gonna look stupid in front of them every day. They will find some reason to laugh at you. It doesn't matter. So just embrace it and have fun. It doesn't mean it's disrespectful. You can do that. And I think everybody's just so worried. And I don't know if it's our culture and everything now, but they're so worried about making a mistake or doing this or doing that. Like, that's how we learn. Show
Yeah,
your kids that you're human. That, yes, adults make mistakes too, and that goes for adult learners too. Like, that's another thing I can't stand. People are like, like, there was some teacher and we did some math problem and I got it right, but I didn't do it in the way that she thought I should have. Now, it didn't say I couldn't do it that way. I just didn't do it the way she thought. And so, she basically, ripped me and was like, "Mer, mer, mer," and I'm like, "But I got it right. And you didn't say I couldn't do it this way." And she's like, "Yeah, but it's not the way you're supposed to." And so she was really rude. And I'm like, if I'm like, I was that kid in the classroom now that I would be shut down and I wouldn't work for you ever again because you just demoralized me. And she looked at me, she goes, "Yeah, but you're an adult." Like, adults can't be treated that way too? Are you kidding me? You can do the same thing to adults. It happens all the time. They can get demoralized. They can do these kind of things. So let people make mistakes and learn and support them and teach them how to work through their mistakes. And what better way to do that than technology that never works when you want it to work?
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that's always going to happen, right?
Always.
Be it new or old or whatever, or
Always.
battery powered. So, measuring success. So, in education, what do you recommend the institutions use to measure the success with the headset program in education? Let's start there.
So again, I think that goes back to your goal. You always have to keep your objective in mind. What is the objective? If the objective is better engagement, then you measure engagement. If it's, learning material, then look at that. You got to look at what the goal is and also understand the technology. So sometimes people put parameters on what they see as success when they don't actually know what the technology is. So when you look at the KDE project, they weren't going to publicize anything about it until somebody high up randomly said, "Well, we're not saying anything until 80% of the headsets are being used." And it was just that blanket statement. And I'm like, that's the most horrible objective ever because A, you dump 70 headsets on them, first off. And B, you could have one or two teachers that use them every day. And so you're having 20 to 30 headsets being used every day, but that's never going to get to 80%. So having realistic and concrete objectives, that's the way to measure success. Also, make it very clear. Like, I think, like I said, well, it increased engagement by 20%. Like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, that's a very broad statement. So have very clear data that shows specifically what was happening.
Gotcha. That's a good point. So, in changing that, what would your thoughts be on the same thing, but measuring it in a law enforcement environment? Let's just say they're using it for de-escalation skills, just to make it at least have a topic to talk about. So, what do you think? What would be an option for success on a program to train on de-escalation? What would they? How would they measure that?
I'd be looking for a change in behavior. So you could do that kind of one of two ways, which would be really interesting, or two ways actually. I would look at what I'd look at the population of officers that used it and what were the, behavior incidences reported before using the VR. So the idea is to de-escalate them. So out of how many, we had 30 opportunities to de-escalate somebody in a month and we only de-escalated them twice. Well, let's look at, after the VR was implemented, we now had, 30 chances to de-escalate them and we de-escalated them 18 times as opposed to 2. Right there, that's huge. That's showing real world statistics that, we're seeing a difference. Or comparing it to a similar type of precinct that has a similar type of population and seeing what their, behavior reports are versus the people using VR. Are they having a better success rate at de-escalating than the ones that aren't? Then that's showing real world impact, and that's how it lets us know that we're having that success that we wanna see.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I don't know that law enforcement really does a really good job of that, but it's a little bit of work, but they're gonna have to learn to do that.
Right?
But I want thank you for joining us. I think it's gonna be very insightful journey that you're going through, and to share it with us is great. Hopefully, you get some messages in 10 years that we both learned from, and in our different environments. But definitely think they're parallel in certain fashions. Definitely have pluses in various ways. It's the audience, and what we're trying to accomplish is the only thing that's different. But thank you again for your time. I know you had a long day, and I appreciate you sitting down with me and accomplishing that. So I'm
No,
gonna,
thank you.
yeah, yeah,
As you can tell, I love to talk VR and learning, so it's been an absolute honor, and thank you for being such an advocate in this industry and such a great friend because we need to have people that we can trust in this industry, and the more people we have in our corner, the better, so I'm grateful to have you and know you, and I look forward to continued success.
awesome. I appreciate that. And that wraps up another insightful episode of the Virtual Reality Reconstructionist. Thank you, Dr. Shannon Putman, for joining us today and sharing your invaluable insights into immersive reality education and how these technologies can be applied to training for public safety in high stakes scenarios. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. A quick word of thanks to our sponsor, a live active shooter survival training by Triple R Investigations, empowering individuals and organizations with life saving strategies to protect themselves during the most critical moments. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform for more episodes exploring the fascinating world of virtual reality, forensic investigation, and public safety technology. Until next time, this is Roger Reinreiter signing off for Triple R Investigations. Stay safe and stay curious.